The sharp crack of suspicion cut through the quiet of Heritage First Bank as the teller's voice sliced across the premium banking floor. "Sir, I'm calling the police. This check is obviously fraudulent." Other customers turned to stare. Diane Harrington examined the check with exaggerated suspicion. She held it to the light repeatedly. Her blonde bob swayed as she shook her head. The check was for $847,000. Calvin Brooks remained calm in his charcoal suit. His leather briefcase sat at his feet. A barely visible federal seal pressed against the worn leather. Diane pushed the check back with 2 fingers. She treated it like something contaminated. This is one of those real-life stories that exposes how black stories unfold in America's financial institutions. Have you ever been so certain someone was lying that you staked your entire career on it? Diane's pearl earrings caught the overhead lights as she leaned back. Her eyes narrowed. "Sir, where did you get this check?" The emphasis landed hard on that single word. The implication was clear. Calvin met her gaze without blinking. "It's my quarterly audit completion bonus," he said. "From my employer." Diane turned to her colleague at the next station. Her stage whisper carried across the floor. "They're getting more sophisticated with the forgeries now." Leisha, a young black teller 2 stations down, kept her eyes on her own screen, but her jaw tightened. She had heard this before. Calvin waited. He had learned patience over 15 years in federal service. Diane typed something into her computer. Her fingers hammered the keys harder than necessary. She made a face at the screen, then another. Each expression broadcast her skepticism to everyone watching. "I'm going to need to see some identification," Diane said. She crossed her arms. Calvin pulled out his wallet. He handed her his driver's license. She studied it like it might be fake, too. She held it up to compare the photo to his face. She tilted it under the light. She ran her thumb across the surface, checking for tampering. "Do you have anything else?" she asked. "Another form of ID?" Calvin produced his credit card, then his health insurance card. Diane normally asked for one form of identification. Everyone in line behind Calvin had shown just one, but she examined all 3 of his cards with theatrical suspicion. "And why do you need this much money?" Her tone suggested the amount itself was evidence of wrongdoing. "I don't need to explain my banking decisions," Calvin said quietly. "I'd just like to deposit my check." Diane's face flushed. "Well, I need to understand the source of funds. It's bank policy." It wasn't bank policy, not for deposits. Leisha glanced over again. Her expression said she knew it too. Calvin's phone buzzed in his pocket. The screen lit up briefly. Caller ID showed Federal Reserve DC. He silenced it without looking. "Ma'am, the check is legitimate," Calvin said. "It's from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. You can verify it." "The Federal Reserve?" Diane's voice dripped with disbelief. "Right." She picked up her desk phone, but instead of calling to verify, she jabbed a button. The branch manager's extension. Within moments, Harlan Emerson emerged from his office. Harlan was in his 50s with a red face and thinning hair. He wore his authority like a shield. He approached with the swagger of someone used to being obeyed. "What seems to be the problem here?" Harlan did not look at Calvin. He directed the question to Diane. "This gentleman is trying to deposit a check for over $800,000, Diane said. "I believe it's fraudulent." "Mr. Brooks," Harlan said, finally glancing at the driver's license still on the counter. "This is highly unusual. Checks of this size require additional verification." "Of course," Calvin said. His voice remained level. "What's your verification process?" The question seemed to catch Harlan off guard. His rehearsed authority faltered. "Well, I'll need to call the issuing institution." "Please do." Calvin checked his watch. Harlan retreated to his office. Through the glass walls, Calvin watched him pick up the phone. The manager's body language shifted between confident and uncertain. He kept glancing back toward the lobby. At the counter, Diane continued her performance. She spoke loudly to Leisha. "I'm telling you, this happens. They print these in basements now. The quality is incredible." Leisha did not respond. She helped her own customer with quiet efficiency. Calvin heard every word. He said nothing. Instead, he opened his briefcase slightly. Inside were dense government documents. Red stamps marked each page confidential. The Federal Reserve seal appeared on multiple folders. An elderly black woman in line behind Calvin caught a glimpse. Recognition flickered across her face. She had seen official paperwork before. She knew what federal documents looked like. A young white couple near the door had their phones out. The woman was filming. She tried to be subtle about it, but Calvin noticed. Everyone always noticed. The security guard stationed by the entrance shifted his weight. Clarence was 60 years old and black. He had worked at Heritage First for years. His face showed the weariness of a man who had witnessed this scene too many times. Calvin's briefcase revealed something else when he had opened it. His business card holder was visible in his wallet. The cards had an embossed gold seal, official federal, but Diane had never asked to see one. His watch was understated but clearly expensive. A Patek Philippe that most people would not recognize. The kind of timepiece that signaled old money or serious professional success. The check itself told a story for anyone who bothered to look. Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago letterhead. Official watermarks embedded in the paper. A signature from Director Vargas. Routing numbers that could be verified in seconds. But Diane had not looked closely at any of that. She had looked at Calvin's face. She had made her decision in the first moments. Everything after that was just confirmation bias. Harlan returned from his office. He moved slower now, less confident. Mr. Brooks, I've placed a call to verify the check, but I'm having difficulty reaching the right department. What number did you call? Calvin asked. Harlan blinked. The main switchboard. The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago has 17 departments, Calvin said to him. Which one handles audit disbursements? Harlan's face went blank. He had no idea. I can give you the direct number, Calvin offered. Would that help? The manager's pride wrestled with his uncertainty. Pride won. That won't be necessary. I'll continue working through official channels. Calvin nodded slowly. He checked his watch again. Behind him, the young woman's phone was still recording. Her Instagram live counter showed viewers climbing. These real-life stories never end well for someone. Calvin just was not sure Diane and Harlan understood who that someone would be. The police arrived. 2 officers pushed through the glass doors. Officer Vance was white, in his 30s, with his hand resting near his weapon. Officer Rivera was Latina, in her 40s, with a measured stride. They approached the counter where Calvin still stood. Diane rushed to meet them. Her voice pitched higher with urgency. Officers, thank you for coming. This man is attempting to deposit a fraudulent check for nearly $1 million. Vance's eyes locked onto Calvin. Sir, can I see some identification? Calvin had already provided 3 forms of ID to the bank, but he pulled out his driver's license again. He handed it over calmly. Rivera took it and walked back to their patrol car to run it through the system. What's in the briefcase? Vance asked. Work documents, Calvin said. What kind of work? I'm a financial auditor. Vance's expression hardened. For who? I'm not at liberty to discuss active assignments. The phrase hung in the air. It sounded evasive. Calvin knew it would, but it was also the truth. Federal auditors signed non-disclosure agreements, revealing audit targets compromised investigations. That's convenient, Vance said. His hand had not moved from his belt. Harlan hovered nearby. He sensed vindication coming. Officers, we believe this check is fake. We're just trying to protect the bank's assets. Rivera returned from the patrol car. She handed Calvin his license back. He's clean. No warrants, no record. That doesn't mean the check is real, Diane interjected. The elderly black woman in line spoke up. Her voice was steady. I've been standing here. You didn't ask anyone else for extra ID. You didn't question anyone else's check. Ma'am, please stay out of this, Vance said. But the observation landed. Other customers were watching now. Most had their phones out. The young couple's Instagram live had grown. Sir, I'm going to need you to step outside, Vance said to Calvin. Am I being detained? Calvin asked. No, but the bank has asked you to leave the premises. I'm a customer attempting to conduct legal business. Sir? Vance's voice dropped lower. Outside now. Calvin closed his briefcase. He walked toward the door. Clarence, the security guard, held it open. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Clarence's expression said everything. Sympathy, frustration, solidarity. Outside, the morning sun was bright. The Michigan Avenue sidewalk was filling with pedestrians. Several stopped to watch. Police lights drew crowds. What do you do for work, Mr. Brooks? Rivera asked. She was taking the lead now. I'm a financial auditor. You said that. For what company? A federal agency. Which one? I'm not at liberty to say. Vance stepped closer. You keep saying that. Why? Because revealing audit targets during active investigations is a federal offense, Calvin said. I'm bound by confidentiality agreements. Rivera's eyes narrowed. She was thinking now. What kind of audits? Banking institutions? Something shifted in her expression. Vance did not notice. He was watching the crowd, which had grown. Someone was chanting, "Let him bank in peace." Another voice yelled, "This is racial profiling." Inside the bank, Harlan was on the phone again, this time with the regional director. Sandra Voss was 90 minutes away, but this situation was escalating fast. Just keep him outside until we verify, Sandra told Harlan. We can't risk liability if the check bounces. Harlan relayed the message to the officers through the glass door. Vance nodded. Mr. Brooks, the bank is refusing to conduct business with you today, Bente. Vance said. You need to leave the premises. I'm on a public sidewalk. You're loitering. Calvin checked his watch. The crowd had grown. The Instagram live stream hit thousands of views. Local news tip lines were lighting up. Someone had sent video to different stations. Diane stood at the bank window. Her arms were crossed. A small smile played at her lips. She looked like someone who had just won an argument. Rivera received a call on her radio. She stepped away to answer it. When she returned, her face was troubled. The check issuer won't confirm or deny over the phone, she told Vance. They say it's protocol. They'll only verify through official law enforcement channels, which takes time. So, we wait, Vance said. No, Calvin said quietly. You don't wait. I'll leave, but I'll be back. Will you? The question was strange, specific, confident in a way that did not match the situation. Rivera caught it. Vance missed it entirely. Sir, if you return and continue to harass bank staff, I won't be harassing anyone, Calvin said. I'll be conducting business. He walked away. The crowd parted for him. Several people called out support. Someone shouted, We're filming everything. Calvin did not acknowledge any of it. He just walked steady and calm until he turned the corner. Then he pulled out his phone. He dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. Director Vargas? The voice was crisp and professional. Ma'am, it's Brooks. Heritage First Bank, Michigan Avenue branch. What happened? Full audit protocol needed. There was a pause. Discrimination. Yes, ma'am. Authorization code. Foxtrot Romeo 7. Another pause. Longer this time. Approved. I'll have the team assembled. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Calvin ended the call. Behind him, he heard Vance and Rivera arguing. The crowd was not dispersing. Someone had started a hashtag. It was trending in Chicago. Inside the bank, Harlan felt his first tremor of doubt. He pushed it away. Sandra Voss had his back. They had followed protocol. They had done nothing wrong. Leisha watched from her station. She pulled up the Federal Reserve website on her computer. She searched for Calvin Brooks. Nothing. But senior auditors would not be listed publicly. That was the point. She searched for Director Vargas. There she was. Amanda Vargas, Director of Supervision and Regulation Division, Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Her photo showed a woman in her mid-40s with severe features and an American flag pin on her lapel. Leisha's stomach dropped. She looked at Harlan's office. Should she say something? Would he listen? He never listened to her. She decided to wait. The young couple who had been filming finally left the bank. They were buzzing with adrenaline. Their video had been shared. Comments flooded in. Some supportive, some skeptical, some racist. One comment caught attention. I used to work at the Fed Reserve. Those checks are real. They're for auditors who complete major assignments. This dude is legit and they're about to find out the hard way. The comment had thousands of likes. Clarence, the security guard, returned to his post. He had worked security for decades, military before that. He knew when someone was in control of a situation. Calvin Brooks was in control. The bank just did not know it yet. A woman in a black SUV parked outside Heritage First Bank. She sat in the driver's seat making phone calls. She did not get out. She just watched the entrance and waited. Another vehicle arrived. This one had government plates. 4 vehicles were positioned around the bank. None of the occupants had entered. They were just waiting. Inside, Harlan felt his second tremor of doubt. This one was harder to ignore. At the appointed hour, Calvin Brooks returned to Heritage First Bank. He was not alone. 4 people walked with him through the glass doors. The lobby conversations died mid-sentence. Harlan felt his blood pressure spike. The first person through the door was a black woman in her 50s. She wore an FBI blazer with a badge clipped to her belt. Agent Patricia Reeves, Federal Reserve Inspector General's office. The second was a white man in his 40s. Former Secret Service by the way he moved. Agent Michael Costigan, Federal Reserve Police. The third was a woman in a severe bun and designer suit. She carried herself like someone who made decisions that affected billions of dollars. Director Amanda Vargas, Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, Supervision and Regulation Division. The fourth was Calvin. Sandra Voss had arrived from out of town an hour earlier. She stood with Harlan and Diane near the manager's office. 3 against 4, except the odds were not even close to even. Calvin walked to the center of the lobby. He set his briefcase on a table. He opened it with deliberate care. Inside were multiple binders. He removed the thickest one. The spine read, Heritage First Bank Safety and Soundness Audit. Harlan grabbed the edge of a desk to steady himself. Sandra's professional mask cracked. Diane's face drained of all color. Ms. Voss, Mr. Emerson, Ms. Harrington. Calvin's voice was calm. I'm Calvin Brooks, Senior Field Examiner for the Federal Reserve. For the past 6 months, I've been conducting a routine safety and soundness audit of your institution. The silence was absolute. Even the customers stopped moving. The young couple was filming again. Viewers climbing. That check you refused to process this morning was legitimate, Calvin continued. Issued by Director Vargas, who oversees all Midwest regional audits. You refused to process it based on no objective criteria. Sandra found her voice first. You were conducting an audit of us? Yes, but we had no notification. Examinations under the Bank Holding Company Act don't require advance notification, which Agent Reeves said. She stepped forward. Her FBI credentials gleamed under the lights. The Federal Reserve has broad authority to examine any institution it supervises at any time, with or without cause. Harlan's mind was racing. 6 months. Calvin had been in this building dozens of times. He had opened accounts, he had made deposits and withdrawals, he had observed their procedures, he had documented everything, every single thing. Mr. Brooks's audit was routine, Director Vargas said. Her voice was crisp. Until 17 discrimination complaints were filed against this branch in the past 14 months. Complaints your regional office dismissed without investigation. Sandra's face went white. Those complaints were investigated. They were not. Agent Reeves pulled out her own folder. We've reviewed your internal files. Each complaint was dismissed with identical language. No evidence of discriminatory practice. No interviews conducted. No video reviewed. No depositions taken. Diane spoke for the first time. Her voice shook. This is absurd. I was following protocol. What protocol? Calvin pulled out a second document from his briefcase. This is my preliminary audit report. Before today's incident, Heritage First Bank was rated satisfactory in compliance. That rating is now under review. He laid the document on the table. The federal seal was prominent on every page. Official, binding, devastating. Your check processing times tell an interesting story, Calvin said. He was reading from his notes now. This branch processed hundreds of checks over $100,000. Verification rate for accounts held by white customers, 2.3%. For black customers, 47.1%. Harlan tried to interrupt. Those numbers are accurate, Calvin said, pulled directly from your transaction logs. Average processing time, 8 minutes for white customers, 34 minutes for black customers. Identification requests averaged 1.2 forms of ID for white customers, 2.8 for black customers. Leisha at her station felt tears sting her eyes. She had known, she had felt it, but hearing the numbers made it real. The elderly black woman from that morning was back in line. She had returned specifically for this. I filed one of those complaints, she said, her voice carried. They told me it was handled. It wasn't, Agent Reeves cut in. But it is now. The Federal Reserve takes discrimination complaints seriously, especially when they reveal systemic problems. Director Vargas opened her own briefcase. She removed a document with a red cover. This is a preliminary enforcement action memorandum. Under the Bank Holding Company Act and the Federal Deposit Insurance Act, patterns of discriminatory practice can trigger several remedies. She began reading from the document. Her voice was flat and professional. Consent orders, civil money penalties up to $1 million per day per violation, removal of management personnel, suspension of business activities, enhanced examination protocols, public disclosures of discriminatory practices. Sandra's knees buckled slightly. Director Vargas, surely we can discuss. You'll receive our formal findings in 14 days, Vargas said. But Ms. Harrington and Mr. Emerson are suspended effective immediately pending investigation. You can't do that, Harlan said. His voice cracked. We can and we are. Agent Costigan spoke for the first time. You'll surrender your credentials and leave the premises now. Diane was crying, actual tears streaming down her face. This isn't fair. I was just doing my job. Your job is to serve customers without bias, Calvin said. You failed. Clarence, the security guard, stepped forward. I'll escort them out. There was something deeply satisfying in his tone. Years of watching, years of knowing. Finally, this. The young couple's live stream now had hundreds of thousands of viewers. Comments were exploding. The story was already on social media. Local news had crews on the way. Calvin pulled out one more document. Agent Reeves, there's something else. What? The test check wasn't my only examination activity this morning. He opened his phone. I recorded my entire interaction with Ms. Harrington using this device. Illinois is a one-party consent state. The recording is admissible. He pressed play. Diane's voice filled the lobby. They're getting more sophisticated with the forgeries now. Then later. They print these in basements now. The word they hung in the air. Everyone knew what it meant. Sandra closed her eyes. The legal exposure just multiplied. Agent Reeves took the phone. We'll need a copy of that recording. Of course. Director Vargas addressed the entire lobby now, staff and customers alike. The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago takes these matters seriously. We will conduct a thorough investigation. Heritage First Bank will cooperate fully or face additional sanctions. Any employee with information about discriminatory practices should contact our office immediately. You will be protected from retaliation. 3 tellers immediately raised their hands. Leisha was first. Calvin walked over to the elderly black woman. Ms. Hargrove, right? You filed a complaint. They told you it was handled. She nodded. It wasn't, but it is now. You'll be contacted by our office for a formal statement and you'll receive compensation for the harm caused. Tears filled her eyes. I thought nobody cared. Somebody always cares, Calvin said quietly. Sometimes it just takes time. Harlan and Diane were escorted from the building by Clarence. Diane was still crying. Harlan walked in stunned silence. Their careers in banking were over. The industry was small. Word would spread. Sandra remained. She was too senior to be walked out by security. But her authority had evaporated. What happens now? She asked. You'll receive a formal letter detailing your suspension and demotion, Director Vargas said. You'll report to our compliance division for reassignment. Your salary will be adjusted accordingly. You'll complete hours of bias training, and you'll write monthly reports on your progress. Sandra's salary was hundreds of thousands a year. The regional director role she had fought a decade to achieve, gone. How much will the adjustment be, she asked. Approximately 66%. Sandra did the math in her head. She would have to sell her house. Calvin closed his briefcase. The system only works if we examine it. That's my job. Today the system worked. Later, the real reckoning began. Heritage First Bank corporate headquarters occupied floors of a glass tower in downtown Milwaukee. The boardroom offered views of Lake Michigan. The table could seat dozens. Today, only a handful were present. Calvin Brooks sat on one side with Director Amanda Vargas and Agent Patricia Reeves. Across from them sat Victor Kensington, CEO of Heritage First Bank. He was in his 60s with silver hair and a Harvard-class ring. Next to him was Naomi Treadwell, General Counsel. She looked sharp and deeply concerned. Board members appeared via video conference. Their faces filled screens mounted on the walls. Each one wore the expression of someone receiving very bad news. Calvin opened his laptop. He connected it to the room's presentation system. His title slide appeared on a massive screen. Heritage First Bank Safety and Soundness Audit Final Report. Dozens of slides followed. Let's begin with the statistical analysis, Calvin said. His voice was steady. Professional, devastating. Click. The first data slide appeared. Heritage First Bank processed thousands of checks over $100,000. These transactions occurred across all branches in multiple states. Click. Second slide. Verification rates varied significantly by customer demographics. For accounts held by white customers, additional verification was requested in 2.3% of cases. For black customers, 47.1%. For Latino customers, 31.8%. The board members' faces on screen showed varying degrees of shock and horror. One woman, an elderly former federal judge, shook her head slowly. Click. Third slide. Average processing times showed similar disparities. White customers experienced an average wait of 8 minutes for large check deposits. Black customers waited 34 minutes. Latino customers waited 21 minutes. Victor Kensington tried to maintain composure. Mr. Brooks, these numbers could have multiple explanations. Account history, check security features. We controlled for those variables, Calvin said. Slide 17. Click. A dense statistical table appeared. We analyzed checks of identical amounts from customers with similar account histories and credit profiles. The only variable that consistently predicted extended processing times and additional verification requests was race. The correlation is 78%. That's statistically significant at the p, less than 0.0001 level. Naomi Treadwell was taking notes frantically. As general counsel, she could already see the legal exposure. Click. Next slide showed ID request patterns. Your tellers requested 1.2 forms of identification from white customers on average. For black customers, that number rose to 2.8. Some customers were asked for 4 or 5 forms of ID for routine transactions. Agent Reeves interjected. We've identified dozens of documented incidents of discriminatory treatment. These include excessive ID requests, questioning the source of funds without cause, suggesting customers use alternative financial institutions, and making assumptions about creditworthiness based on appearance. Click. Email evidence appeared on screen. Calvin read directly from the displayed messages. This email is from your regional training director. Quote, "Flag all large checks from urban accounts for extra scrutiny." End quote. Kensington's face flushed. That email was unauthorized. The employee was terminated. No, he wasn't, Agent Reeves said. He received a promotion. He's now your vice president of branch operations. Silence. Click. Another email. This one is from a branch manager orientation. If they look like they don't belong, trust your gut. End quote. This was part of official training materials. Naomi Treadwell stopped writing. She closed her eyes. This was indefensible. Click. Video footage appeared on screen. Security camera footage from different branches. Each clip showed black customers receiving different treatment than white customers at adjacent stations. One clip showed an elderly black man being questioned for minutes about a deposit. The teller called security. The next clip showed a young white woman depositing cash. The teller smiled and processed it in seconds. No questions. The board members on video screens were conferring with each other through muted side conversations. Their body language screamed panic. Director Vargas spoke for the first time. Your bank holds billions in deposits. You operate branches across multiple states. A consent order would require you to admit wrongdoing in all jurisdictions. The legal exposure is substantial. How substantial? Kensington asked. Class action lawsuits from affected customers could exceed hundreds of millions, Naomi Treadwell said quietly. She had done the math while they had been talking. That's a conservative estimate. If punitive damages are awarded, it could reach more. The number hung in the air like smoke. The Federal Reserve is offering a voluntary compliance agreement, Calvin said. You can accept it, or we can proceed with formal enforcement action. Kensington's ego had not fully died yet. We're not admitting guilt based on one incident at one branch. There are dozens of documented incidents across multiple branches, Agent Reeves said. Her voice had an edge. Now we have body cam footage from police interactions, internal emails from different employees, testimony from current staff members who witnessed discriminatory training practices, and sworn depositions from customers who experienced bias. Click. Calvin displayed a new slide showing a social media monitoring report. Since the Michigan Avenue incident went viral, we've received additional complaints through our online portal. These are being investigated individually. Several involve your senior management. That's impossible, Kensington said. Click. Next slide showed complaint summaries, names redacted but details clear. One complaint described a loan officer who suggested a black applicant was not a good fit for a mortgage because the neighborhood was too upscale. Another detailed a branch manager who physically followed a Latino customer around the lobby while they used the ATM. A third involved a teller who called security on a black woman trying to close her account because she seemed nervous. The former federal judge on the video screen finally spoke. Her name was Margaret Thornton. She had served on the Circuit Court of Appeals for years. Victor, accept the agreement. This is indefensible. We can fight this, Kensington said. We have rights. You have obligations, Judge Thornton said. To your customers, to your shareholders, to the law, you failed all three. Accept the agreement before this gets worse. Two other board members voiced agreement. Kensington was losing his allies in real time. Calvin pulled out a bound document. The terms are as follows. Settlement fund for affected customers. Ms. Harrington and Mr. Emerson, terminated with cause, barred from working in the banking industry. Ms. Voss demoted to compliance officer with appropriate salary reduction. Independent monitor appointed. Algorithmic check processing system implemented to eliminate subjective discrimination. Quarterly bias audits at all branches. Public apology and transparency report. Naomi Treadwell reviewed the terms. Admission of wrongdoing required? Director Vargas said, no settlement without accountability. Kensington stood up. His face was red. I won't destroy this company's reputation over political correctness. Sit down, Victor. Judge Thornton's voice carried authority even through a video screen. This isn't political correctness. This is civil rights law. Accept the terms or I'll vote to remove you as CEO. Calvin watched the power dynamics shift. Kensington had built Heritage first through aggressive acquisitions. He had cultivated a reputation as a maverick, but mavericks could not violate federal law and survive. The CEO sat down slowly. There's one more thing, Calvin said quietly. He opened a folder he had kept separate from the others. My father was a postal worker for decades. He saved every penny. When he tried to deposit his retirement check in the past, a bank teller accused him of stealing it. The confrontation escalated. My father had a heart attack in the parking lot. He survived, but he never trusted banks again. He kept his money in a safe at home until he died years ago. Calvin looked directly at Kensington. He lost years of potential investment returns because one teller decided he looked like a criminal. The compounded loss was significant. That's what bias costs. Real money, real lives, real futures. Kensington held Calvin's gaze for a long moment. Something in the CEO's expression finally cracked. "I'm sorry," he said. "Your apology doesn't change the past, Calvin," Calvin replied. "Your compliance changes the future. Sign." Naomi Treadwell slid the settlement agreement across the table. Victor Kensington picked up a pen. His hand shook slightly. He signed. Heritage First Bank had just admitted to systematic racial discrimination. The legal precedent would echo for years. The consequences arrived swiftly and completely. Diane Harrington was escorted from the building by corporate security. She carried her personal items in a cardboard box. Her banking license was suspended pending a formal hearing. She would never work in financial services again. Local news crews caught her leaving. She tried to play the victim. "I was just following protocol, she told a reporter. The footage went viral. Comments were brutal. Within weeks, her LinkedIn profile disappeared. The harassment had become overwhelming. Friends stopped returning calls. Her husband filed for divorce. Months later, the public humiliation was too much. Last anyone heard, Diane was working as a receptionist at a car dealership. Her salary had dropped significantly. Harlan Emerson faced similar devastation. His banking license was revoked immediately. The Federal Reserve published a formal order barring him from the industry. Former customers filed a separate civil lawsuit against him personally. The legal fees forced him to sell his house. His wife left him. His adult children stopped speaking to him. One of them posted on social media, "My father's actions don't represent our family values." The post had been shared widely. Harlan now worked in warehouse logistics. Nobody would hire him for management positions. His background check revealed the federal enforcement action. Employers saw discrimination findings and moved to the next candidate. Sandra Voss received a demotion that destroyed her career trajectory. From regional director at a high salary to compliance officer at a fraction of that amount. She sold her condo and moved to a smaller apartment. Her job now consisted of writing monthly reports on bias training and attending sensitivity workshops. The woman who had dismissed discrimination complaints now spent her days learning why those dismissals were wrong. The irony was not lost on anyone. Heritage First Bank itself faced a corporate earthquake. The stock price dropped. Shareholders demanded accountability. Victor Kensington resigned under pressure. His severance package was zero. The board invoked a clause allowing termination for cause without compensation. Kensington's decades-long banking career ended in disgrace. The new CEO was Charlene Brooks. She was the first black woman to lead Heritage First in its history. Her appointment sent a clear message. Things were changing. The systemic reforms began immediately. Heritage First invested millions in a new algorithmic check processing system. The AI evaluated transactions based purely on objective factors, account history, check security features, transaction patterns, and fraud indicators. Race was not a variable the system could access. Neither was zip code, which often served as a proxy for race. The algorithm was audited quarterly by independent experts to ensure no discriminatory patterns emerged. Processing times dropped across all demographic groups. The efficiency gains were remarkable. Turns out discrimination was also bad for business. Heritage First launched the Transparency First app. Customers could now file complaints directly with the Federal Reserve through their phones. Every transaction could be rated like an Uber ride. Branch performance dashboards became public on the website. Sunlight was the best disinfectant. Training protocols changed completely. All employees now completed hours of bias training before starting work. The curriculum included role-playing exercises with Federal Reserve auditors acting as customers. Quarterly recertification was required to maintain employment. Failure rates were high initially. Employees were terminated for failing bias training. Heritage First did not soften the standards. If you could not treat customers fairly, you could not work there. An independent monitor was appointed. Retired federal judge Margaret Thornton took the role. She conducted unannounced secret shopper audits with diverse testers. Results were published quarterly on Heritage First's website. The first report was damning. Branches showed continued bias patterns. All branch managers were fired. The second report showed improvement. The third report showed substantial progress. By the fourth report, Heritage First had become a model for the industry. Statistical impact was measurable. Discrimination complaints dropped. Customer satisfaction among Black and Latino customers rose. Employee turnover among tellers dropped as hostile workplace culture was addressed. Heritage First's industry ranking for diversity practices jumped. Major publications profiled the transformation. The story became a case study in business schools. But the impact extended beyond one institution. Other banks voluntarily requested Federal Reserve audits. They had seen what happened to Heritage First and wanted to avoid the same fate. Better to find problems internally than have Calvin Brooks find them. The American Bankers Association revised national training standards. Federal regulators increased enforcement resources. States passed laws requiring banks to report demographic data on transaction processing times and verification requests. The ripple effects touched millions of customers. Calvin Brooks received a promotion to assistant director in the Federal Reserve Inspector General's office. His work had revealed systemic problems that required systemic solutions. He testified before Congress about banking discrimination. His testimony was measured, factual, and devastating. The New York Times profiled him in a feature story, "The Auditor Who Changed Banking." Calvin gave few interviews. He preferred to let the work speak for itself. But there was one personal victory that meant more than the headlines. The elderly black woman from the Heritage First lobby was named Evelyn Hargrove. She received a settlement from the bank, the exact amount Calvin's father had tried to deposit in the past. Ms. Hargrove used the money to establish a scholarship fund for young black students pursuing finance careers. The Calvin Brooks Memorial Scholarship, named after Calvin's father, not Calvin himself. The first scholarship recipient was Calvin's niece, Jasmine. She was starting her freshman year at Howard University, majoring in economics. When Calvin attended the scholarship ceremony, Ms. Hargrove embraced him. "Your father would be proud," she said. Calvin had to take a moment before responding. "He always said the work was worth doing, even if you never saw the results." "He saw them," Ms. Hargrove said. "Through you." The system had changed. Not perfectly, not completely, but measurably, meaningfully. Intelligence had defeated prejudice. Documentation had trumped denial. Patience had outlasted rage. The real-life stories that matter most are the ones that create lasting change. Calvin Brooks returned to Heritage First Bank on Michigan Avenue. The branch had been remodeled. Diverse staff photos lined the walls. All our welcome signs appeared in multiple languages. The atmosphere felt different, lighter, more open. Calvin approached the counter. The teller was a young black woman named Kenya Thompson. She was professional. With a warm smile, her nameplate identified her as branch manager. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks," Kenya said. "How can I help you today?" Calvin handed her a check. Another quarterly audit completion bonus. Kenya examined the check professionally. She scanned it into the system. The algorithm processed it in real time. No subjective judgment, no bias, just data. "This will be deposited into your account immediately, Kenya said. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" The entire interaction took minutes. No drama, no questions about where he got the money, no suggestions that he did not belong, just professional service. "Thank you," Calvin said. "That's all." Kenya smiled. "Mr. Brooks, before you go, I want to thank you, not just for what you did here, but for showing us what accountability looks like. I just did my job. You did more than that. You changed the system." She paused. "I wouldn't have this job if you hadn't." Calvin shook her hand. "The hard part is maintaining it. That's your job now." As he turned to leave, Clarence, the security guard, approached. The man was still working. He was still watching, still protecting. "Mr. Brooks," Clarence said quietly, "my grandson asked me if things can really change. I showed him your story. He's applying to college now. Business major." Calvin felt something tighten in his chest. "Tell him the system only works if good people hold it accountable." "I will, sir. Thank you." Calvin walked out of Heritage First Bank. He paused at the glass door and glanced back. Behind him, diverse customers conducted business without fear. Tellers processed transactions without prejudice. The machinery of banking worked the way it was supposed to. His father's photo was in his wallet. Calvin touched it briefly through the leather. The work continued. It always continued. But this moment was a victory worth acknowledging. Not revenge, reform. Not humiliation, education. Not destruction, reconstruction. Not silence, transparency. Calvin had proven something important. Intelligence defeats prejudice when given the chance. Systems beat individual bias when properly designed. Documentation trumps denial every time. Patience outlasts rage consistently. The real-life stories that change the world do not always involve dramatic confrontations. Sometimes they involve briefcases full of data. Sometimes they involve quiet men in charcoal suits who refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. These real-life stories happen every day. Most do not end with federal investigations. Most do not result in multi-million-dollar settlements, but they all matter. Every single one. Calvin Brooks's story is one of thousands. The difference is he had the power to fight back. Most people do not, but you have power too. Your voice, your experience, your refusal to stay silent. Have you experienced discrimination in banking, shopping, healthcare, or any business? Drop your story in the comments below. Your voice matters. Someone needs to hear it. Someone needs to know they are not alone. Share this video with someone who needs to see that systemic change is possible, that quiet courage works, that intelligence and evidence can defeat prejudice. Subscribe for more stories of people who transformed injustice into reform. No violence, no viral outrage, just intelligence, evidence, and courage. Calvin Brooks did it with a briefcase full of documents. What will you do with your voice? The system only changes when we force it to.